The thunder wasn't the loudest sound that night, not even close. The loudest sound was the steady, reassuring hum of my generator, a diesel-powered heartbeat in the chest of a blacked-out neighborhood. Outside, the world was a mess of wind and lashing rain. Inside my small office, a single monitor glowed, the only star in a sky of darkness. On it, a progress bar was inching its way toward completion. Flood, model, sim, 78%. Let me back up. My name is Alex. I'm a hydrologist, or at least I used to be, before a bad calculation on a bridge project years ago sent my career tumbling down a ravine. Now, I'm a freelancer, a consultant, mostly dealing with drainage issues and land surveys, but this was different. This was my obsession. For months, I'd been building a private high-resolution model of our region's watershed. I had a theory that the new luxury development, Pine Valley, was being built on unstable ground, threatening the whole area. This simulation was the key. If you're watching Karenology, you probably know the type of person who runs our homeowners association. Her name is Karen, and she treats the neighborhood bylaws like they were handed down from a mountain. That night, the storm had knocked out power to the entire county. For most, it was an inconvenience. For me, it was a race against time. My servers needed constant power, so the generator was running. It wasn't pretty, but it was necessary. The crash of my front door being thrown open was so violent, it felt like a physical blow. I jumped from my chair, my heart hammering against my ribs. And there she was. Karen, squeezed into a bright yellow raincoat, her face a clenched fist of pure indignation. Flanking her were two hulking figures in black security uniforms, the kind of rent-a-thugs the association keeps on retainer for compliance issues. Rainwater dripped from their jackets, pooling on my hardwood floor, the air filled with the smell of ozone and wet wool. "Turn it off, Alex!" she shrieked, her voice cutting through the hum of the generator and the roar of the storm. "Right now, you are in violation of Section 12, Paragraph 4. The noise is a public nuisance." I stood there, hands slightly raised, like I was facing a cornered animal. "It's a power outage, Karen," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "My generator is a little louder than your sense of entitlement, but I think the neighborhood will survive." Her eyes narrowed to slits. It was the wrong thing to say. Have you ever had someone walk into your home like they own it? Like your rights are just a suggestion they can overrule? Let me know in the comments if you've been there. She didn't respond. She just gave a sharp nod to the guard on her right. He was a mountain of a man, with a neck as thick as my thigh. He took a step forward and put a heavy hand on my chest, shoving me back. It wasn't a violent push, just a firm, dismissive one, an assertion of power. While I was off balance, the second guard strode past me, out the back door, and into the screaming wind. I heard a click, then a grunt, and the world went silent. The hum of the generator died. The light from my monitor vanished. The digital heartbeat stopped. On the screen, the simulation, my work of 6 months, was dead at 78%. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of the rain and Karen's smug breathing. In the darkness, my hand instinctively found the cold, familiar shape of the tool on my desk. It was an old geodesic marker, its brass head bent from a fall years ago. It was from the bridge project, the one I got wrong. "The rules are for everyone, Alex," Karen said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "You should remember that." She and her goons turned and left, leaving the door wide open to the storm. I didn't move. I just stood there in the dark, the cold rain misting my face, clutching a symbol of my greatest failure. I felt that old, familiar pit in my stomach, the feeling of being utterly, completely powerless. I eventually closed the door, my movements slow and mechanical. Sleep was impossible. I just sat in the dark, listening to the storm rage, my own internal storm even louder. The next morning, the sky was a bruised, washed-out gray. The power was still out. As I walked to the kitchen to make coffee on a camping stove, I saw it. Stuck to my front door was a crisp, white envelope. The official seal of the Homeowners Association gleamed like a tiny, malevolent eye. I knew, even before I touched it, that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one that was just beginning. The envelope felt heavy in my hand, heavier than a single sheet of paper had any right to be. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind of stationery meant to convey importance and authority. I tore it open. The words inside were simple, brutal, and to the point. A $5,000 fine for creating a noise nuisance during a designated quiet period. Another line item cited a non-compliant modification to property, which I assumed was the concrete pad I'd poured for the generator. But here's the kicker. The notice ended with a final demand: demolish and remove the generator and its housing within 48 hours. Failure to comply would result in an additional fine of $1,000 per day. I read it twice, then a third time. The numbers blurred. $5,000, $1,000 a day. It was a declaration of war disguised as a piece of paper. The air, still damp from the storm, seemed to crackle. My coffee pot hissed on the camping stove. Forgotten. This wasn't about noise. This was about control. Karen wasn't just trying to punish me. She was trying to break me. Attached to the notice was a copy of the complaint. It listed 10 names, 10 of my neighbors, all supposedly driven to madness by the sound of my generator. I recognized every name. The Millers from across the street. Old Mr. Henderson 2 doors down. Even Sarah, the single mom who always waved when I walked my dog. The signatures were a neat, orderly column of betrayal. My first thought was that it had to be a lie, a forgery. So I did the only thing I could. I walked outside. The sun was trying to break through the clouds, casting a weak, watery light on the storm-battered street. I went straight to Mark's house. Mark was a retired contractor, a guy who understood how things worked. He was usually out in his yard, but today his house was quiet. I knocked. After a long moment, the door opened a crack. Mark's face appeared in the gap, his eyes shifting nervously. He looked old and tired. "Mark," I said, holding up the letter. "Did you sign this complaint?" He wouldn't meet my gaze. He just stared at a spot over my shoulder. "Alex, Look, it's complicated." Complicated? I felt a surge of frustration. "It's a simple question. Did you sign it, or did she fake your signature?" He finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't anger. It was fear. "She came by yesterday afternoon," he whispered, his voice raspy, "before the storm hit. Said she was doing a preemptive noise survey. Said if we didn't sign, she'd have to start enforcing every little violation in the book." He gestured vaguely toward his backyard. "My shed. The permit lapsed years ago. It's not up to code. She knows it. Said it would be a shame to have to report it to the county." He looked down at his feet. "I'm sorry, Alex. I've got grandkids coming to stay. I can't afford the fines to tear it down and rebuild." It was the same story at the next house, and the one after that. Blackmail, pure and simple, dressed up as community service. Karen had weaponized the bylaws, turning them into a club to beat everyone into submission. My anger began to curdle into something colder, something heavier. I wasn't just fighting one vindictive woman. I was fighting the silent consent of my neighbors. They had chosen their own small comforts over doing the right thing. Have you ever felt that kind of isolation, where you're standing alone against a crowd that's too scared to stand with you? That evening, the real attack began. The power was back on, and the neighborhood's online message board lit up. It started with a post from Karen, a sanctimonious little message about community standards and the importance of respecting our shared peace. Then came the comments. "Alex's generator sounded like a jet engine. My kids couldn't sleep. He thinks he's above the rules. It's always the same with him. What if that thing had caught fire? He's putting us all at risk." The post painted me as a selfish, arrogant monster, an outcast who cared nothing for his neighbors. My phone buzzed with notifications, each one a small, digital stone being thrown. They were creating a narrative, and I was the villain. The economic threat was bad enough, but this felt worse. This was an attempt to erase me, to turn me into a pariah in my own home. I looked at the growing mountain of debt on the paper in front of me, $9,000 now, and the rising tide of hate on my screen. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the post-storm air. Karen wasn't just trying to win. She was trying to annihilate me, and the scary part was, it seemed to be working. The silence from my so-called friends was the most damning evidence of all. The online mob was one thing. A knock on my door 2 days later was something else entirely. I opened it to find a young woman standing on my porch. She looked barely out of college, with an earnest face and eyes that seemed to be taking in everything at once. She clutched a clipboard to her chest like a shield. "Mr. Davis?" she asked. Her voice was hesitant. "My name is Lisa. I'm with the County Environmental Office. I leaned against the doorframe, my arms crossed. After the past few days, my trust in anyone with a clipboard was at an all-time low. Let me guess, Karen sent you about the generator. A faint blush colored her cheeks. No, actually, this is different. She gestured vaguely toward the east, in the direction of a small pond that bordered our neighborhood, and the new Pine Valley development. We've had some anonymous complaints about a strange smell coming from the water. People are saying it's chemical. I'd smelled it too, a faint acrid odor on the wind, like burnt sugar and decay. Most people were blaming it on an algae bloom, a common occurrence in late autumn. Officially, Lisa continued, lowering her voice, the county's position is that it's a natural bloom, but my boss asked me to pull some groundwater charts just in case. She unclipped a map from her board and unfolded it. It was a standard geological survey map, crisscrossed with blue lines indicating subterranean water flows. The thing is, these maps are almost 10 years old. They're all we have. I looked at the map. I knew these charts like the back of my hand. They were good, but they were flat. They didn't account for the complex three-dimensional reality of water moving through soil and rock. I motioned her inside. In my office, I scanned her map and overlaid it onto my own 3D terrain model, the one the storm had interrupted. Even with the incomplete simulation, the picture was becoming clearer. I pointed to the screen. Here's the problem, I said. Your map shows this whole area. I traced the outline of the Pine Valley construction site as stable bedrock, but based on my seismic data, that's not right. I typed a few commands, and a new layer appeared on the model, a dark, shadowy shape deep beneath the surface. There's an unmapped aquifer right here, a fast-moving one. It runs directly from the Pine Valley land, under the edge of our neighborhood, and empties right into that pond. Lisa stared at the screen, her eyes wide. So if something were to leak on their property, it would go straight into the water table, I finished for her, and it would show up in that pond in less than 12 hours. A silence settled over the room. The implications were staggering. If I was right, the developers of Pine Valley, a company with deep ties to our homeowners association board, were building on a geological time bomb. It explained Karen's fanatical obsession with getting rid of my generator, with discrediting me. She wasn't just a power-tripping busybody. She was running interference. Funny thing is, for a moment, I felt a rush of hope. This was it. This was the leverage I needed. A potential environmental disaster was a lot more serious than a noisy generator. I had proof, or at least the beginning of it. I thought I finally had a weapon to fight back with. I was wrong. I was so wrong. You ever have that moment where you think you finally figured out the game, only to realize you're not even playing on the right board? A week later, Karen called an emergency meeting of the homeowners association. She held it in the community clubhouse, a sterile room with beige walls and cheap folding chairs. The place was packed. Karen stood at a podium at the front, beaming like a queen addressing her court. Next to her was a man in an expensive suit, his face tanned and placid. He was Mr. Henderson, the head of the Pine Valley Development Company. As you all know, Karen began, her voice smooth as silk, there have been some concerns about the safety of the Pine Valley project. She glanced in my direction, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. So, to put everyone's minds at ease, we commissioned a fully independent geological survey. She gestured to a screen behind her. A glossy presentation popped up, filled with charts and graphs. A man introduced as a leading geologist took the podium and spent 10 minutes talking in circles about soil density and bedrock stability. The conclusion was presented in a huge friendly font. The land is 100% safe. Henderson then stepped up and announced that, as a gesture of goodwill, every resident of our neighborhood would receive a special 10% discount on any lot purchased in the new development. The room erupted in applause. People were clapping, smiling, shaking Henderson's hand. They weren't just sold on the idea, they were profiting from it. I stood up. This is a lie, I said, my voice cutting through the applause. The ground is not stable. There's an aquifer. Before I could finish, a wave of groans and boos rolled through the crowd. Sit down, Alex, someone yelled. You're just sore about the fine. Karen just smiled, a perfect predatory smile. She had bought their loyalty. My truth didn't stand a chance against their 10% discount. I walked out of that meeting feeling a kind of cold despair I hadn't felt in years. I had lost. She had beaten me, not with facts or logic, but with greed, and as I stepped out into the chilly night air, my phone buzzed. It was a new email. The subject line read, "Client contract cancellation." The reputational war had just found a new front. The email was from my biggest client, a construction firm that had kept me afloat for the past 3 years. The message was polite, professional, and utterly devastating. Due to recent information that has come to our attention regarding your standing in the community, it read, "We feel it's in our best interest to terminate our contract, effective immediately." It was corporate speak for, "You're toxic." I sank into my office chair, the glow of the screen illuminating the stark reality of my situation. The fines from the Homeowners Association were now climbing past $9,000. My primary source of income had just evaporated. The wave of negative reviews online, which I'd initially dismissed as petty harassment, was clearly having a real-world effect. They weren't just attacking my reputation, they were methodically dismantling my livelihood. I spent the next hour scrolling through the local business forums. The reviews were brutal, and they were all posted within the last few days. Unreliable, argumentative, doesn't respect local ordinances. It was a coordinated smear campaign designed to paint me as an unstable crank. I tried to post rebuttals, but my comments were quickly flagged and removed for violating community guidelines. I was being silenced, erased from the very professional world I had helped build. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, there was a knock at the door. This time, it wasn't a college intern or a smug president. It was a man in a crisp uniform from the county code enforcement office. He wasn't smiling. "Mr. Alex Davis?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. "That's me. We've received an anonymous tip regarding unpermitted electrical work at this residence." He peered over my shoulder, his gaze locking onto the wiring that ran from the main panel to my office servers. "We'll need to inspect the premises." An anonymous tip. I almost laughed. I could picture Karen on the phone, her voice dripping with false concern. "I'm just worried about the safety of the neighborhood." It was a trap, and I had walked right into it. The wiring was perfectly safe, installed by me, but I'd never gotten around to filing the permit. It was one of those things you mean to do, but never quite get to. In Karen's war, that small oversight was now a fatal weakness. 2 hours later, a bright red tag was slapped on my main circuit breaker. "Unsafe. Do not operate." My power was cut. Not by a storm this time, but by the slow, grinding gears of bureaucracy. I was completely isolated. No power, no internet, no income. I stood in my silent, darkening house, the red tag mocking me. It was a perfect, calculated checkmate. Karen hadn't just beaten me in a public meeting. She had systematically cut every wire that connected me to the outside world. I felt something break inside me. It was the last thread of fight I had left. I looked around my office, at the dead screens, the useless equipment. My life's work was in those machines, and they were just as powerless as I was. For the first time, I truly considered giving up. Just pay the fines, tear down the generator, and disappear. Let her win. What other choice did I have? Have you ever been pushed so far that surrender feels like the only sane option? I walked into my garage, the air thick with the smell of old oil and sawdust. My tools hung in neat rows on the pegboard, silent and patient. I reached for my old tool chest, the one that held the memories of my former life. My fingers brushed against the worn wooden handle of an old screwdriver. The handle was melted and deformed on one side, a scar from an arc flash that had nearly taken my partner's eye years ago. I picked it up, the weight of it familiar in my palm. That accident, it was my fault, a miscalculation, a risk I didn't see. I had let my partner down, and the guilt had haunted me ever since. I'd sworn to myself then that I would never again fail to see what was right in front of me. And that's when another thought began to form, pushing through the fog of defeat. Karen thought she had me cornered. She had taken my power, my money, my reputation. But she had forgotten one thing. She had forgotten who I was. I wasn't just a numbers guy. I was a builder, a problem solver, and a problem I've learned is just a solution you haven't found yet. I looked from the scarred screwdriver in my hand to the dead electrical panel on the wall. An idea began to take shape, a wild, desperate, and possibly brilliant idea. Karen wanted to play by the rules? Fine. I would play by the rules too. But I would use a rulebook she didn't even know existed. I picked up my phone. There was one person who might be able to help, an old friend, a mentor. I just hoped he'd answer. The phone rang 4 times, each one stretching into an eternity. I was about to hang up when a gravelly voice answered. "Haynes." "Professor Haynes, it's Alex Davis." There was a pause. Professor Haynes had been my mentor in college, a brilliant cantankerous geophysicist who saw the world in layers of rock and streams of data. We hadn't spoken in years, not since my career went sideways. "Alex," he said, his voice warming slightly. "I'd say it's good to hear from you, but people only call me when they're in a very specific kind of trouble. So, what is it? Unstable soil, fraudulent survey, or a good old-fashioned water rights dispute?" I let out a short, humorless laugh. "All of the above, Professor, and then some." I spent the next 20 minutes laying it all out for him. The homeowners association, Karen, the generator, the faked report, the aquifer, the shutdown. I told him everything, my voice a flat monotone. When I finished, the silence on the other end of the line was heavy. "Paper," he finally said. The word was sharp, like a stone striking flint. "She's beating you with paper, Alex. Reports, fines, bylaws. People believe paper. They trust shiny brochures and official-looking documents more than they trust their own eyes." "So what do I do?" I asked, the desperation creeping back into my voice. "I can't fight a mountain of paper." "Then don't," he said. "You don't fight paper with more paper. You fight it with reality. You're a hydrologist, for God's sake. You understand the physical world. You have to make the invisible visible. You need to give them a show they can't ignore." He paused. "You need to show them the water." The line went dead, but his words hung in the air. Show them the water. It was like a switch had been flipped in my brain. All this time, I'd been trying to win an argument. Haynes was right. I needed to stage a demonstration. I needed to pull back the curtain and show everyone the truth, not with charts and graphs, but with something real, tangible, and undeniable. My mind started racing, connecting pieces, the unmapped aquifer, the strange smell from the pond, the speed of the underground flow. I had a theory. Now I needed a way to prove it, and I needed to do it publicly. A new plan began to form, a plan that was audacious, risky, and had 1,000 ways it could go wrong. But it was the only shot I had. First, I needed an ally on the inside. I called Lisa, the young intern from the environmental office. I caught her on her cell phone as she was leaving work. "Lisa, it's Alex Davis. I need your help. It's about the pond." "I can't," she said immediately, her voice tight with fear. "My boss, he warned me to stay away from you. He said you're a troublemaker. I could lose my internship." "I know the risk," I said, keeping my voice level. "But I also know that you got into this field because you care. That smell from the pond isn't algae. It's industrial runoff. The Pine Valley developers are poisoning that land, and they're using your office's outdated maps to cover their tracks. I can prove it, but I need to know something first." I took a breath. "I need to know the security schedule for the Pine Valley construction site." There was a long silence. I could hear her breathing, the internal struggle playing out over the phone. Was she a rule follower or a truth teller? What would you do in her shoes, with your whole career on the line? "There's a blind spot," she finally whispered, so quietly I could barely hear her. "On the eastern fence line, near the old access road. The security patrol passes it at 2:15 a.m. and doesn't come back around until 3 SAO. You'd have about 45 minutes. "Thank you, Lisa," I said, a wave of relief washing over me. "You're doing the right thing." "Just be careful, Alex," she said, and hung up. The second piece of my plan was more direct. I went to the local hardware store, the kind of old-school place where the owner knows everything about everything. I bought 3 5-gallon drums of commercial-grade fluorescent dye, the kind they use for leak detection. It's intensely colored but environmentally harmless. The guy at the counter raised an eyebrow. "Big plumbing job?" he asked. "Something like that," I said. That night, under the cover of a moonless sky, I put my plan into motion. At 2:10 a.m., I was crouched in the woods bordering the Pine Valley site. The air was cold and smelled of pine needles and damp earth. I slipped through the fence in the blind spot Lisa had told me about. The construction site was a ghostly landscape of skeletal frames and dirt piles. I found what I was looking for, a deep trench that had been dug for a sewer line, already half full of muddy groundwater. This was the source. This was where the aquifer was closest to the surface. One by one, I emptied the drums of dye into the trench. The water instantly turned a shocking, unnatural shade of neon green. It didn't make a sound. It just swirled in the darkness, a silent, toxic-looking secret. I was out and back in my truck with 10 minutes to spare. The easy part was over. Now came the hard part, waiting, and setting the stage for the final act. I pulled out my phone and looked up the Pine Valley Development's website. Right there on the homepage was a banner ad, flashing in bright, cheerful colors. Community Appreciation Picnic, this Saturday. Fun, food, and a look at your future home. I smiled. It was perfect. Karen wasn't just going to give me an audience, she was going to gather them all in one place for me. The trap was set. All I had to do now was hope they walked into it. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp, perfect autumn weather that makes you believe everything is going to be okay. The sky was a brilliant cloudless blue. The air was cool and smelled of wood smoke and decaying leaves. It was a beautiful day for a public execution. My own. The Community Appreciation Picnic was being held on a large manicured lawn right at the entrance to the Pine Valley Development. White tents had been set up. A barbecue grill was sending plumes of savory smoke into the air. A small jazz trio was playing something bland and inoffensive. It was a picture of suburban perfection, and it made my stomach turn. I saw Karen moving through the crowd, resplendent in a cream-colored pantsuit, shaking hands and accepting compliments. Henderson, the developer, was by her side, radiating a smug, proprietary air. They were the king and queen of their new little kingdom. I had spent the last 2 days in a frenzy of preparation. My power was still off, so I'd run a cable from my truck's inverter to a single laptop. I'd secretly placed a dozen cheap, wireless soil moisture sensors around the perimeter of the picnic area and along the banks of the nearby pond, burying them just beneath the sod. It was a long shot, but I needed live data. I had to show them, not just tell them. As I walked toward the gathering, I could feel the mood shift. Conversations faltered. The smiles on people's faces tightened. I was the ghost at the feast, a reminder of the unpleasantness they had all agreed to ignore. Mark, my neighbor, caught my eye from across the lawn. He gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. At least I had one person in my corner. I let them enjoy their hot dogs and their small talk. I let the jazz trio finish their set. Then, just as Henderson stepped up to a small podium to give his welcoming speech, I made my move. I walked to the front of the crowd, stopping about 20 feet from the podium. I held up my tablet. The crowd grew quiet, an uneasy murmur rippling through them. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice carrying in the still air, "before you tell us about the wonderful future you're building, I have a question." Karen stepped forward, her face a mask of polite fury. "Alex, this is a private event. You are not welcome here. If you don't leave, I will have you removed for trespassing." "I'm sure you will," I said, not taking my eyes off Henderson. "But first, I want to talk about the water. You presented a report that said this land is stable, that it's safe to build on." I turned the tablet toward the crowd. On the screen was my 3D model, showing the shadowy shape of the aquifer beneath our feet. That report was a lie. Or, at best, it was dangerously incomplete. A man in a Pine Valley polo shirt started walking toward me, clearly one of their security guys. "This land," I continued, raising my voice, "is sitting on a fast-moving underground river, and for the past few weeks your construction site has been leaking something into it. Something that is now concentrating in the pond right over there." I pointed to the placid-looking body of water just beyond the trees. Henderson laughed, a dismissive, condescending sound. "This is absurd. This man is a disgruntled resident with a grudge. There is absolutely no evidence to support these wild claims." "Isn't there?" I said. I tapped my tablet. The screen switched to a live feed of data from my hidden sensors. A series of graphs showed moisture levels spiking unnaturally high, just a few feet below the perfectly green lawn we were all standing on. "This ground is saturated. It's a sponge. But you're right, that's not proof of a leak." I looked around at the crowd. Their faces were a mixture of curiosity, annoyance, and hostility. They were on the verge of turning on me completely. This was the moment. It was now or never. "So let's get some proof," I said. I looked directly at a worker standing near a newly installed sprinkler system. "You, turn on the sprinklers, all of them." The worker looked at Henderson, confused. Henderson just scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous." "What are you afraid of, Mr. Henderson?" I challenged. "It's just a little water, unless you know something we don't." The crowd started murmuring. The taunt had hit its mark. They could smell fear. Karen, realizing they were losing control of the narrative, snapped at the worker. "Just do it! Turn them on and let's get this over with." The worker shrugged and turned a valve. With a series of clicks and hisses, dozens of sprinkler heads popped up from the lawn. Arcs of crystal-clear water fanned out across the grass, sparkling in the afternoon sun. For a moment, nothing happened. The crowd watched, some looking bored, others smirking. I felt a cold knot of dread tighten in my stomach. What if I got it wrong? What if the dye had dissipated? And then I saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible spot of green, appearing near the edge of the lawn. Then another, and another. Like a disease spreading in fast motion, patches of lurid fluorescent green began to bleed up through the turf. The clear water from the sprinklers was forcing the dyed groundwater to the surface. Within a minute, the entire pristine lawn was covered in sickeningly bright green streaks, all flowing in the same direction, toward the pond. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The jazz music faltered and died. The smell of barbecue was replaced by the damp, earthy scent of the exposed water. Someone screamed. They were standing on it. The poison was right there, beneath their feet. I turned the tablet back to the crowd. "This," I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the stunned silence, "is the water from the Pine Valley site. This is what you're building your homes on." I looked at Henderson. His face was ashen. His jaw was slack. He was staring at the green-stained grass as if he'd just seen a ghost. Then I looked at Karen. The mask was gone. For the first time, I saw real naked fear in her eyes. The game was over. The paper had been beaten by reality, and the beautiful, perfect lawn at her feet was the receipt. The silence that followed was more profound than any noise. It was a vacuum, sucking the air from the lungs of everyone present. The perfect suburban party had become the scene of a toxic revelation. People shuffled backward, staring at the garish green water seeping into their shoes, as if it were acid. The transformation of the lawn from a symbol of prosperity to a biohazard sign took less than 60 seconds. Henderson was the first to break. He stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "He did this! It's a trick! Some kind of eco-terrorism." But his voice lacked conviction. His eyes kept darting to a man in a sharp suit standing near the back of the crowd. A man who hadn't touched a hot dog or a glass of iced tea. I recognized him from the business pages. He was a senior vice president for the insurance company underwriting the entire Pine Valley project. Right now, his face was a stony mask of calculation. He was running numbers, estimating risk, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that his company's exposure was about to be reduced to zero. The insurance man calmly took out his phone, dialed a number, and spoke in a low, clipped tone. "It's me. Shut it down, all of it. Issue a stop work order and suspend the policy, effective immediately, and get legal on the line." That call was the real kill shot. Not my demonstration, not the fear in the crowd. It was the cold, hard logic of money. With no insurance, there would be no bank loans. With no loans, there was no project. Henderson's billion-dollar dream had just dissolved into a puddle of green-dyed mud. Karen looked from Henderson's pale face to the insurer's rigid back, and she finally understood. Her authority, her power, it had all been tied to the promise of Pine Valley. Now, that promise was broken. She looked at me, her face a ruin of hate and disbelief. "You," she whispered, the word filled with venom. "You'll pay for this." But there was no threat left in her voice. It was just the hiss of a deflating balloon. Here's the funny part. After all the fighting, the fines, the harassment, the victory itself was quiet. There was no cheering, no one slapped me on the back. The residents, my neighbors, just quietly dispersed, their minds grappling with the fact that their 10% discount was a down payment on a toxic dump. They looked at me not with gratitude, but with a kind of resentful awe, as if I were the bearer of a plague they'd rather not have known about. In the days that followed, the dominoes fell. The Pine Valley project was buried in lawsuits and regulatory investigations. Henderson's company filed for bankruptcy. Karen resigned as president of the Homeowners Association, citing personal reasons, and put her house up for sale. The fines against me were quietly dropped. The red tag on my electrical panel was removed. I had won. A few weeks later, a package arrived. It was a formal letter of thanks from the county environmental office and a small engraved plaque from the local hospital, thanking me for keeping their power on during the storm. But there was also a letter from a law firm in another state, asking me to serve as an expert witness in a case that was remarkably similar to mine. Then another, and another. My name was now attached to this specific kind of fight. I had won my peace, but in doing so had become a public figure, a specialist in battling the hydras of local corruption. My quiet life was over. That was the price. I was offered the presidency of the Homeowners Association. They wanted me, the giant killer, to lead them. It came with a hefty stipend, the power, the money. It was all laid out for me. And for a moment, I was tempted. Think about that. After everything, the easiest path would have been to become the very thing I fought against. I turned them down. Instead, I spent a weekend drafting a new set of bylaws for the association, a Homeowners Bill of Rights, which included mandatory independent environmental audits for any new construction and strict limits on the board's fining power. I posted it on the community message board for anyone to use. I wasn't interested in being a king. I just wanted to make sure the castle was built on solid ground. The other night, I walked out to the edge of my property, to the place where the Pine Valley sign used to be. It was gone now, replaced by a simple wooden sign that read, "Future site of Oak Bend Community Park." The town had reclaimed the land. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old, bent geodesic marker. For years, it had been a symbol of my failure, a reminder of a calculation I got wrong. I looked at it for a long moment, then knelt down and pushed it firmly into the soft earth at the corner of the new park. It wasn't a marker of a survey point anymore. It was a testament, a promise, a reminder that sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to show everyone, in undeniable, living color, exactly where the water flows. And if you've ever had to fight a battle that everyone told you was unwinnable, I hope you find a way to show them the water too. Thanks for listening.